Every year, it's the responsibility of the missions conference directors to figure out what the theme of the conference will be. Heather and I prayed for months to discern this year's theme and passage. It took us forever. We struggled with our theme for the whole summer, and that was hard because we were located on different sides of the country. I was actually back home in Japan for a while, so we were in different countries. Communication was kind of spotty. And one day when I was walking around a Hobby Lobby in the middle of a hurricane in North Carolina, and Heather, the adventurous one, was off on a 5-day solitary retreat in the mountains of Northern California, like with no electricity, and barely any cell phone reception, we came across the beginnings of our theme. In a physical situation that mirrored our mental one, God showed us the light. The theme was fleshed out over the next few weeks, and after more prayer and reflection, we were able to present the theme to SMU and Dr. Corey. This morning, we want to do the same for you. Isaiah 42 says, "This is what God the Lord says, He who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and all that comes out of it, who gives breath to his people and life to those who walk on it. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and make you as a covenant to all peoples, a light for the Gentiles. To open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. God, who created the heavens and earth, and who has given life to us who walk on it, has called us to declare his righteousness. He will not leave us alone. He will give us strength and guidance for this work. His covenant is not only for the Jews, but for all people. This salvation is likened to light and judgment to darkness, but God's saving power is light in our dark world. Matthew Henry says, "The work of redemption brings back man to the obedience he owes to God as his maker. Christ is the light of the world, and by his grace, he opens the understandings that Satan has blinded and sets us at liberty from the bondage of sin. The Lord supported his church, and now he makes new promises, which shall certainly be fulfilled as the old ones were." Biola, we're calling you and ourselves to the work of redemption. I know we're not all called to go to the heart of Africa. We're not all called to China or Romania. Some of us aren't even called to leave our country. In reality, most of us aren't even called to leave our country. But we're all called to further God's kingdom. We're all called to be a part of this mission. There's a whole world that needs to hear about Jesus. Romans 10:14 says, "How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they not hear if there's without someone preaching to them?" Missions Conference doesn't exist to guilt you into going to the nations. It's not here to pressure you into praying for an unreached people group every day. In fact, for some of us, these could be the wrong paths for our life. Last year, Dr. Corey said, "Missions is not one among many good pursuits. Missions is not something reserved for specialists, for missionaries, for the Cook School of Intercultural Studies. For missions is at the very heart of God, and everything that God said and everything he did to reconcile a sinful world to himself as an expression of his missionary heart." What Missions Conference is here is to tell you simply that you have a responsibility to the Great Commission. How can they see if there is no one to bring them light? Our brothers and sisters are sitting in darkness, in the dungeon waiting to see the light. Christ redeemed us and freed us not only for our own freedom, but for God's glory. We are to do the same, and that'll look different for all of us. Our world is blind, Biola. How will we bring them light?
Like Megan said, how can our world see if they're blind? Who will show them the light? The answer to this question is found in the Bible. Surprise! But seriously, throughout the Bible, we see this theme, this narrative of light, and how the light is constantly confronting the darkness, shining bright despite all circumstances. This idea of light invasion is especially illuminated when John, the disciple that Jesus loved, wrote his story of learning, of living with Jesus. To John, Jesus was the light. As he opens up his testimony, like they read this morning, John speaks of Jesus as the light of life. He says, "In him, Christ, was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it." The true light that gives light to every man has come into the world. As John continues telling his story of his friendship with Jesus, this manifestation, this incarnation of the light of life becomes fuller into the picture when in John 9, Jesus comes across a blind man, a man born blind and under the curse of God. And as soon as Jesus' disciples see this man, the words of Deuteronomy 28:15 and 28 enter their minds. These words that they were taught as a youth tell them that those who do not obey the commands of the Lord are smitten with a curse of blindness. And this is why they turn to Jesus and ask, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" To which Jesus responds, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life." You see, the disciples didn't really see who this man was. They saw him as a blind man, a man under a curse. But Jesus, who is the light that causes us to see, truly saw this man. Instead of seeing his sin, Christ, the sent one, saw it as an opportunity to show his love to this man, to show the glory of the Lord. Jesus saw it as an opportunity to be the light of the world. As in Isaiah it says, he saw it as an opportunity to open blind eyes. Jesus then turns to his disciples and says, "As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Jesus is the light of the world, the light that causes us to see. When a person is fully blind, their eyes cannot see because their eyes lack the ability to perceive, to understand this light. Their eyes lack the ability, in a sense, to translate this light. And that is why the blind man was blind, because his eyes lacked this ability. But Jesus, when he saw him, he not only saw this physical condition, but he also saw this spiritual condition. So to combat it, he bends over and picks up the earth, spits into it. A very controversial act, which some rabbis of the day even forbade, because not only was it Sabbath, but putting dirt on people's eyes was associated with pagan practices. But Christ, the light of the world, dared. He dared to pick up the dirt, and in an act of recreation, he spits into it, puts his mouth to it, in a sense, breathes in it per se when he spits, and places it on the eyes of the blind man, as a potter molding the clay, as the sent one recreating places that were broken. He takes the earth and puts it to the eyes of the blind man and says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," meaning sent. Jesus, the sent one, the Messiah, sent this blind man out to walk an act of faith and go to this pool. The pool of Siloam was actually a mikveh, and it can be seen behind me. A pool where Jewish people go to cleanse themselves after they have been made unclean. And it is from these cleansing practices in Judaism that we get the Christian practice of baptism. In a sense, Jesus was sending this blind man out to be baptized, to be cleansed from all his impurities and made clean so that he too could perceive light. And as he washes and the mud comes off of his eyes, this man that Jesus saw, that Jesus truly saw, begins to see for the first time. But the interesting thing is that once this man begins to see, or I guess this formerly blind man begins to see, his friends, his family, his entire synagogue becomes blind. It says in the word, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." The others in this man's life were too preoccupied with the formerly blind man's curse from God, the curse of blindness, that they didn't notice that they too were also afflicted with a curse, the curse of spiritual blindness. So they bring this formerly blind man to the synagogue to question him, to see how it is that he sees. And they bring him before the Pharisees to explain. And it is in this act that this formerly blind man declares light to the darkness. On the full light spectrum, as you can possibly see behind me, there's so much light that we cannot perceive with our eyes. In fact, our eyes can only see 2% of the light in the world. And the other light on this spectrum include radio waves, microwaves, infrared, X-rays, gamma rays. And it's with these different portions of light that are unperceivable by the human eye that we experience the warmth of a sunny day. When you are feeling that warmth on your skin, you're actually feeling the light. And when you hear a song over the radio, it is actually through light waves that you are able to hear. You are hearing, in a sense, through light. You can see through light, you can feel light, and you can hear through light. And that is why the formerly blind man comes to the synagogue and he speaks through the light. He declares light. He speaks light into existence. And he tells of how a man named Jesus performed a miracle. He was once blind, but now he sees. The Pharisees are so attached. They're so attached to their own blindness, so afraid of this declaration of light that they cast this formerly blind man out of the synagogue. And when Jesus hears of this, he comes to him, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he?" the man asked. "Tell me so I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and worshiped him. However, the story does not end there, and it is actually here that we enter the story. We too were once like this formerly blind man, living in darkness without ability to see, to translate light. Then the light of the world touched us so that the glory of God might be displayed in our lives. He put mud on our eyes and in an act of recreation washed us, cleansed us, so that our eyes might be opened to see light, to see Christ. It is now our turn to be declarers of light. It is our turn to speak light to all peoples. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before all men that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Indeed, for the whole world to be engulfed in light, to see the light of Christ, we must shine as bright reflections of him in the deepest, darkest places, the places where there is no light. The return of Christ will not come until we as Christians bind together as children of light, shining in the world. Jesus also said, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So, how can we be light? Well, as Megan said, we aren't all called to do the same thing. We're called to do different things in order to be light to the nations. Being light doesn't mean packing up, moving to the jungles of Africa, and working with the Dagba people if you hate wildlife, are allergic to dirt, and every other plant species known to man. No. Being light is using your gifts to God's glory. If God has given you a passion for the Dagba people, then by all means, go, work, live, and be an incarnation of this light to these people. If God has given you a passion for prayer, then by all means, begin praying that these people might encounter the light of Christ. And if God has blessed you with money, and to some extent everyone in this country has been blessed with this gift, be a good steward of that gift. Give it towards missionaries and towards Bible translation so that these people too might also experience the light. This is just an example, but being light is using your gifts, your talents for God's glory, and it is a careful combination of the body of Christ, going, praying, and sending. It is during missions conference that we will unpack what this looks like. But let us imagine how, by being a light, that we can usher in the kingdom of heaven. Let us dare to imagine how we can be light invaders. In a light-invaded world, we see students here at Biola giving up their lunches to feed homeless people. Thank you, Biola. In a light-invaded world, we see poverty eliminated, slaves set free, and gardens thriving. In a light-invaded world, we see blind eyes opened. And in a light-invaded world, we see Palestinians celebrating the birth of Jewish children. In a light-invaded world, we see every tribe, every tongue, and nation glorifying God around the throne, singing praises to him. You, Biola, are a light invader. Don't hide your light under a bushel, but let it shine so that the glory of Christ may be made known to the nations who have not heard of him. Don't you want to be part of the light? Don't you want to usher in the kingdom of heaven? Once we as Christians speak this light, become the light to the nations, the confrontation of darkness will be complete and every other light will pass away. In Matthew it says, "The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and then the stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear and the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory." It is because of this glory that when the new heaven and new earth are created, that we will not need these lights. The earth will, as it says in Revelation, will not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. By being light, we are ushering in the return of Christ. By being light invaders through Christ, we are bringing the kingdom of heaven. By going to the nations, we are declaring the light of Christ. And that is why this year's missions conference theme is, "Let there be light."
Yeah, so good.
On the way in, you were given glow sticks that you were told not to break until now. And I want to release you guys to bend, to snap these sticks, to hold these sticks high so that all can see that you are a reflection of Christ, a formerly blind man or woman. You were once blind and now you see.
Oh my gosh, so good.
I would like to introduce you to a woman who is using her gifts and talents for God, who is an example of this life, or of this light. Her name is Caitlin McIntyre, and Caitlin has been given this beautiful gift of singing, and it is through that gift that she honors God. However, when she was born visually impaired, and to some extent, she was born blind. Yet in reality, Caitlin sees more than most people. And she is gonna lead you in one last song, a declaration of light, a declaration that we, once formerly blind people, are called to open eyes that are blind. We are called to be light.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.